Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to get started in just a minute here. As you guys are logging in, we'd love to hear from you in the chat if you want to introduce yourself. I know we have people, I said good afternoon, but we have people from some different time zones joining us. So either good morning or good afternoon. And we'd love for you to introduce yourself if there's an organization you're affiliated with, just so we can kind of see who's in the audience. And if you want to, you can tell us what your favorite shape is, or if you have a lucky number, since we're talking about all things math this morning. You can also use the chat. You can use the Q&A function. I know we've all been here, done this for a while already. So we like to make these sessions really interactive. And so I just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to get questions answered. You can put them in the Q&A. We'll also probably be sharing some information and materials via the chat during the event. So if you kind of want to have that up, we'll share links or information as appropriate and be watching for your questions. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute. And actually, while we're doing this, I am going to oops, sorry, one second. I'm going to show you guys a poll, if I can get it to work. Nope. Liam, are you able to share it?
Oh, the poll?
Yeah. Here we go. I can share it now. It popped up. All right. So poll, just to kind of get a sense of people's different comfort level. There's no right or wrong answer, just to kind of see what's your comfort level with engaging with children in math related activities, whatever that means to you. I'm definitely not an expert, but maybe someone here is. Maybe, well, Christopher probably is.
Well, that's why we have them on, right?
Right, exactly.
I'm loving seeing people's different favorite numbers and shapes. It's not a question we normally ask. So some love for squares, circles, favorite number 26. I love when they're very specific too. That's great.
Yeah, I guess I should have thought about what my favorite shape is. I don't know. I'll think about it during this session. So it looks like quite a number of people are fairly comfortable. We have one expert and then a number that aren't very comfortable or just kind of unsure about their sort of comfort level with math, which is perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll. And again, if you're just joining, I'm not looking at chat from where I am, but if you're just joining, feel free to jump in the chat and introduce yourself and tell us something about yourself or why you're here, what organization you're from. Liam, I'll introduce myself and Liam, and then I'm going to introduce our other guests in just a couple of minutes here. But I'm Chris Hopland. I'm the executive director here at Reach Out and Read Minnesota. And I'm with one of our other staff members, Liam.
Hey, everyone.
And so Liam will be manning the chat for us today. All right, I'll start just by telling you a little bit about Reach Out and Read, and then we'll jump into our session for today. So for those that are new to us, for those that are new to Reach Out and Read, and you heard about this, welcome. We'd love to have you learn more about our organization. We partner with medical providers and clinics around the state. So we currently partner with 291 clinics that do well-child visits. And at each visit, from 6 months to 5 years, the medical providers are trained in our model. They bring a book into the exam room and they give the book to the child and family and use it as a tool to talk about the importance of reading, talking, singing, and sharing books together. This is a model that's been around for 32 years. It is a national program, and we have a lot of research backing it up. So I won't spend time going into that, but feel free to visit our website and kind of learn more about our program. A quick thank you to our executive sponsor, Health Partners, and they have this wonderful collaborative program called Little Moments Count that you could also check out. Maybe Liam could drop that website in the chat, the Little Moments Count website. Lots of good resources for parents and families with young kids. If you are interested in learning more about us, we are having our spring breakfast benefit, May 25th, our first one in person since 2019. It will be hybrid, so we also have a virtual option, virtual live option, if that works better for you, or if you don't live close to here. It will be in St. Paul, and it is a breakfast, and it's just a chance to learn more about our work, meet our staff, meet our board. We have a keynote speaker, and if you're interested, the registration for that will probably open tomorrow or Friday for you to sign up. So getting into math, which is why you're all here, the sort of impetus for this session and for our work around early math actually started about 7 years ago when Reach Out and Read on a national level got a grant from the Heising-Simons Foundation to pilot a program called Reach Out and Read Counts. And Minnesota was in this pilot program, one of the 5 states in this pilot program that's gone on for a while. And I described very basically our model. What Reach Out and Read Counts does is it uses the model of giving the book to prompt medical providers to talk to parents about early math concepts. It's really about getting down to letting parents know that they don't need to be math experts in order to talk and engage their children with math concepts like pointing and counting, looking at comparisons and shapes, which is bigger. And then when they're a little bit older, counting pictures on it or counting objects in a page. And so we've been doing this for a while with a set of clinics. But of course, like everything that was completely, the pilot rollout has been delayed because of COVID. We're just coming back to it, and we have new staff and new people involved at the clinics, and we've gotten a lot of questions, great questions around, what is this program? And I think a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of math and talking about math concepts with kids. And so we wanted to bring Christopher on and have him teach us a little bit more about these concepts and how we can better engage with our kids and in whatever way you work and interact with kids. So we have two other people on this, panelists on this. So Dr. Christopher Danielson has worked with math learners of all ages, 12-year-olds in his former middle school classroom, calculus students, teachers, and children of all ages with their parents and caregivers at Math on a Stick at the Minnesota State Fair, which I can attest is very fun to bring your kids to. He writes curriculum at Desmos and books for Stenhouse. He blogs at Talking Math with Your Kids, which I'm sure Liam will put a link to that in the chat as well. And we'll also follow up with an email with that info. And then we also have Dr. Gigi Chawla with us, and she'll be kind of coming in after Christopher and with the Q&A. For those of you that have been to really any Reach Out and Read event, you've probably met her before, but she is our medical director here at Reach Out and Read Minnesota, and also is the chief of general pediatrics at Children's Minnesota. She's also frequently in the media, so if she looks familiar, you might have seen her on WCCO. And so she will be, again, joining us at the end. And I am going to turn it over to Christopher here, and hopefully the technology piece will work. And then let you take it away, Christopher. Let me see here. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much to Reach Out and Read and the whole team for inviting me to come speak with you all today. I have for you 3 simple messages, each illustrated by an example or 2 to make things concrete. So let me make sure we've got the tech running. I'm not yet clicking ahead. There we go. So supporting children's early math learning. So the first of those 3 simple messages is that children know and can do more math than their caregivers expect. It's one of the more, sorry, there's a question about what is Math on a Stick. I will tell you about that in the flow of things in just a moment. So yes, excellent question. One of the more robust and frequent summary findings of children's math learning outside of school as well as inside of school is that children know and can do more math than their caregivers expect. I'll talk more about where that math comes from and how they learn it. But this idea of the difference between what children can do, what's going on in their minds, and the expectations that caregivers include parents, kindergarten teachers, surprisingly, don't expect that there's quite as much math going on in kids' minds. And so the gap between those 2 things, what kids can do and what caregivers expect, and what people designing for young children expect children to be able to do, has consequences. And that's what I want to start off with. So here is an example of a thing that is out in the world. Somebody, colleague of mine sent this to me, a picture of a t-shirt that is evidently for sale at the Gap at this very moment, and for toddlers. And at first blush, we should be excited, right? Math, we're putting math into the conversation for toddlers. And yes, I am excited about that. But there are some things going on here that are representative of that gap between what we think children can do and what they can actually do. But before I dig into that, just to make clear, because I know it's a little bit of a fuzzy screen grab from the GAP's website, I grabbed it yesterday. We have in the upper left a trapezoid, we've got a circle, there's a rectangle, a square. The little thing next to the square there is labeled oval. Down below, we've got parallelogram, diamond, triangle. So I'm gonna have some critiques of this shirt in just a moment, but please understand, I would be excited for toddlers to be walking around wearing this and talking about shapes. And yet, I'm greedy, I want more for kids than the things that we expect that they're able to do. Here is an example of a young child. My teacher friend, May Vang, this is her daughter, Zoe, having a lovely time at Math on a Stick. I'll tell you about Math on a Stick in just a moment. Zoe is playing with a collection of shapes puzzles that are designed, again, for toddlers. So we have two examples of things designed for the same age population. She's delighting in the summer sunshine, she's got some sort of puzzle block in her hand. In case you can't read, the puzzles are labeled in the bottom right. We have hexagons. There's one that says ellipses. The one she's playing with is labeled conic sections. There's triangles, pentagons, and regular polygons are the other things that she's playing with. So Math on a Stick is a creative, playful family math event that takes place every summer at the Minnesota State Fair. It grew out of a combination of two things. One is my work on the blog, Talking Math with Your Kids, in which I had been working to help parents understand how to support young children's math learning for a period of time. I didn't mean to advance yet. There we go. I'll be back on Zoe. We have about 15 to 20 different creative, playful math activities. Some, like the puzzles you're looking at, designed for the very youngest math learners. And we have more sophisticated, we have things that are designed for older folks as well. All of the things that we have at Math on a Stick are free once you're in the fair, and have different layers of depth for children to engage with. So it's a combination of the work that we did. I was doing Talking Math with Your Kids, and having visited a beautiful literacy event that is now about 10 to 12 years old called the Alphabet Forest. Deb Frazier, a local children's book author, was an artist in residence a long time ago, about 15 years ago probably, at the State Fair. And out of that grew just this beautiful literacy event that, like Math on a Stick, is outdoors. First time I sat down there, it was clear to me that I needed to build the math version of this. And so together with colleagues at the Minnesota Council of Teachers of Mathematics, with the support of the Minnesota State Fair Foundation, submitted a proposal, and we're up and running. So it's open 11 hours every day from 9 a.m. until 8 p.m. every day during the fair, 12 days of fun, ending Labor Day. We're all volunteer run. I'm not compensated. There is a budget for materials, but we have a different visiting mathematician or mathematical artist every day, and about 35 to 40 volunteers filling shifts each day. So hundreds of volunteer shifts filled by a couple hundred volunteers. It's a big project. It's a tremendous amount of fun. And I would love to continue the conversation there. So come on out and shoot me an email before you come, so I'll know to give you the tour. A lot of joy happening there. So back to the shape puzzles. Zoe, right there, toddler. She's the target audience for the T-shirt we looked at earlier. And I want to focus your attention on the contrast here. I'm not having a lot of luck with controlling the screen. So I think, can I give up control, Chris, and have you do the back and forth? this is the slide I'd like to be on. I knew that was
Yes,
going to happen.
yep, I can absolutely do that, Christopher.
Thank you.
This is the slide you do want to be on?
No, I want to be back.
Right here.
That is where I would like to be. Nope, sorry.
There we go.
There we go. Yep. I'm not going to touch anything while I talk here.
Okay.
So on the top row on the left, we have a hexagon, and on the top row on the right, we have a bunch of hexagons, right? Both of these have the word hexagon, right? So they're both introducing math vocabulary. But I used to work a lot with future elementary teachers, and one of those courses that I taught was a geometry course, and the very beginning of an extended unit of study of shape and proof in geometry. I would ask them, give each of them a Post-it and ask them to draw a hexagon. And on that Post-it, and then they would hold up their hexagons, and I would take a picture of them holding up their hexagons. And every single one of the hexagons that those students drew, the future elementary teachers, people who in a year or two were going to be leading geometry activities with young children, drew the hexagon that you see right there on the left. They didn't usually put eyes on it, but it was a regular hexagon. So on the right, by contrast, we have a puzzle that I designed for Math on a Stick. And at the top, again, it says hexagons. And there is a wide range of six-sided shapes. So the contrast here is that young children learn, and I'll talk about this in more depth in a moment, but young children learn about objects in the world, whether they're mathematical objects, whether they're linguistic objects like nouns and sentences. They learn them through exposure. And so by the time children get to elementary school, almost all of the hexagons that they have seen have been regular hexagons. If they have that word in their vocabulary at all, it's assigned to this particular image on the left, maybe with or without googly eyes. But if a child has a chance to play with a thing that says hexagons at the top, so that when their parent is seeing them play with it, the child's not going to read the word, but the parent is, just like on the t-shirt. Parent reads the word hexagons. What do those all have in common? The thing they have in common is that they have six sides. A hexagon is a six-sided shape. That's a mathematical definition, but the only examples that kids have are this very limited single example. Notice also that on the t-shirt, all of the hexagons, all of the shapes, just like the hexagon we see here, have one side that is horizontal. So they're all in a standard kind of orientation. Children develop ideas that that's what hexagon means, because that's what they've essentially been taught, whether explicitly or not. And then down below we have an oval. There's a math word, ellipse. There's nothing wrong with using oval, but there's also no reason that a child can't have the word ellipse come through their vocabulary at some point as they are learning about shapes. So yes, hexagon, Dr. Gigi's talking about hexagon diversity, absolutely. And one of the really interesting findings that's true of human beings, not just of young children, is that there is, Daniel Kahneman wrote about this in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which I highly recommend. Our brains really don't want to apply the slow thinking logical part. That's hard work. It takes a lot of energy. It takes concentration. What our brains are really good at doing and what they prefer to do is make quick judgments. If we're sorting something, we like to be able to do it quickly. And it takes a lot of effort on the part of a teacher or a set of materials or a parent or the individual to engage that slower logical part of the mind. So you might ask a child about, say, triangles. What's the definition of a triangle? And they might tell you a triangle is a shape that has three sides. But if you show them a triangle that is too tall and skinny, they'll say it's not a triangle because it doesn't look like one. So the difference between the images that we have in our minds and the definition takes a lot to get the definitional part of our mind engaged. One way to do that is when we're learning about shapes is by showing kids lots of shape variants. So not just one hexagon, diverse many hexagons, not just in one orientation, but in all kinds of orientations. Similarly with ovals or with ellipses, not just one ellipse, but a wide range of them. Including special cases, two of the ellipses, you can't see it because of the strange angle here, but those two red ellipses in the upper left are actually circles. So that would be the other thing that I would want to say here before we move on to the next piece, which is, again, if all we ever show are the special cases, children will assume that the special cases are the things, even if they know the definitions. And so whether it's a school activity or a shapes book that we're taking home, we want lots of shape variants. I guarantee you, here's a little test that you can apply, that if you head out to a bookstore, or as I did yesterday, to a library, and look in the math section, you will almost certainly find at least one book that has shape definitions. Sometimes, like the book I found yesterday at the library, it is a book completely dedicated to a single shape. There was a book titled Rectangles. Picked it up and just knew, not a book I'd ever held in my hands before, but knew there was not going to be a single square in the Rectangles book. Flipped it open, sure enough, not only was there not a square, because a square is a special rectangle, it actually does belong in there and children can handle that. But the definition that was offered in an entire book about rectangles for early readers, the definition that was offered actually didn't distinguish between rectangles and quadrilaterals. Rectangle was just described as a shape that has 4 sides and 4 corners, which is not wrong, but also not complete. Children can handle special cases. They can handle the idea of a square being a rectangle, just like they know that babies are human beings, puppies are dogs. They can handle that. They know that broccoli is a food. It might be a food that they like or a food that they don't like, but the idea that we can't talk to children about both the special case and the larger at the same time is silly nonsense that's perpetuated by a lot of the resources that are offered to children. And we want them to have a wide range of examples in their minds so that both the fast thinking and the slow thinking part of their brains are engaged with meaningful mathematics. Now we can go ahead to the next slide. Because relatedly, first message was children know and can do more math than their caregivers expect. Because we don't expect that kids can do sophisticated mathematics or can think in sophisticated ways about mathematics, we don't offer them sophisticated mathematics to play around with. I think we should, hence the puzzles, and hence what I would think would be a better t-shirt. So young children learn math like they do language. There is an assumption about math learning that is different in our society from language learning. We don't teach young children language in a logical way. We know that children absorb language. We know that if we want children to have big vocabularies, that means that we're going to have to use a lot of different words with them. If we want children to be readers, we know that they have to be surrounded by books. We have to have them engage with books in a wide range of situations. They should see adults reading books, right? We know that language is something that is absorbed by children as they engage in the culture. We assume that that's not true for math, but we're wrong about that. Children absorb math ideas in exactly the same way that they absorb language ideas. Plus, as they enter school age or as they get interested in ideas, there's also this logical component, which is true of language as well. Once children get to school, we start to teach them about the direct link between the letters and the sounds in ways that they might or might not be experiencing when they're reading books at home. That's a job that school does very well. Similarly, we teach them what a noun is and a verb and the various parts of speech. And school does that job very well with mathematics as well. The part that we're missing in math is understanding that children absorb a lot of cultural ideas. So Chris, if you could take us to the next slide, I want to tell you a short little story. So here is an object that was sitting around our house. There's no reason that it has to be days till Christmas. We could slap a new label over that so that it feels appropriate in any kinds of household. It could be days till your birthday. It could be days till grandma and grandpa come to visit. The idea here is not that this is about Christmas. That's just a characteristic of the object that was lying around my house. And so this is, there are two of these cubes. They have it's well designed so that there are various digits on each of the faces. And every day you can turn the faces and get it so that there are I think it's essentially an advent calendar. So count down from 25 to 1. And so this was with 6 days until Christmas. So it must have been December 19th, a long time ago. And my daughter, who was 6 at the time, who's 15 now, this is how it appeared on her way out as she was headed out one day. And then I came back, she had come back from school, I assume, and I came back from work, and the 0 was missing. And there was only the 6 there. And so I asked her about that. I go, hey, looks like the 0 is missing. You know anything about that? And she said, yes, I got rid of it. And I said, well, why? And she said, because there aren't 60 days until Christmas. And we proceeded just to have a lovely conversation about numbers, how they're structured. Like I wrote a whole bunch of numbers out for her, curious how she was going to read them. And we just had a great little talk about numbers, because this object that had numbers was on it, was in our lives. And she began to interact with it. So again, that in just the same way that if I had used a word that she was unfamiliar with, she might have asked about it. Or if she used a new word, I might have asked her about it. I didn't tell her she was wrong. I just noticed that she had interacted with a thing. I asked her about it. We had a great conversation about place value. If you could go ahead to the next screen. Here is a photograph that comes from an early childhood classroom. This one is actually run by a couple of folks, including somebody who I know through Twitter. This classroom is in Toulouse, France. It is an international school classroom. Simon Gregg is an amazing early math educator. And what happened here was just he left these objects out in a place that kids could play around with them. So it's a magnetic board, and you've got all the numbers from 1 to 100, each on their own magnet. And kids are just working together to put them in place. Not because it's a thing that he wanted them to do, but because it's a thing that seemed like it would be fun, right? That it was clear to these children that these numbers are meant to go on this grid. And so they began to put them in place. Careful examination here turns up all sorts of really, really fun stuff. They're using all kinds of really interesting and useful number patterns. These are probably 4-year-olds as they're putting the numbers up there. So they're learning not through somebody teaching a lesson about place value, but by using what they already know about numbers and about patterns to create structures. So again, children learn language or math much more like language. We surround them with interesting things, they will do interesting things with them. And that's the next and third and final of my short messages. So let's go straight ahead to that. Excellent, thank you. So given an opportunity, and this is what we see at Math on a Stick all the time, is what we see in Simon Gregg's classroom. Given an opportunity, children will pursue sophisticated ideas. I'm gonna show you one more contrast. It's on the next slide. On the left, we have a mathematical object as it comes from the manufacturer, and on the right is the same mathematical object, although I'd argue actually a very different one, as we alter it for Math on a Stick. So there's a grid of, looking at the one on the left, there's a grid of 9 by 9 buttons, 9 rows of 9 buttons each. Each of them works like the end of a clicky ballpoint pen. You click it once and it goes down, you click it again and it goes up. And so on the grid over there, you have all the multiplication facts, 1 times 1 through 9 times 9. And when you pop one of those buttons up, then the product is on the front. So in the upper left on the front would be just the number 1. The button in the lower right, you pop it up and it says 81 on it. And it says multiplication at the top. These are sold at Lakeshore Learning as a multiplication machine. There are also addition, subtraction, and division machines. They are essentially mechanical flashcards. The intended way to play with, to work with this object is to look at one of the buttons, say 4 times 5, think to yourself, 4 times 5 is 20, pop the button up, and check your work just as if you were flipping over a flashcard. But if any child in the history of the world has used this object in this way, without being told that that's how they have to do it, I will gladly eat my hat. Those buttons are super fun to play with. What I found in my own home, working with my own children, and what we found at Math on a Stick is that if instead we cover up those buttons with precision cut sign vinyl, both covering up the top, we put a little piece of green sign vinyl, and none of the buttons here are punched up, but you'll see in a moment some that are. On the front is just a little silver, so we cover up all of the numbers, and there's this nice visual contrast. If we cover all that up, children do amazing and wonderful things. I could regale you for hours about the sophisticated math that I've seen kids do, but I just want to tell you one quick story, and that's going to take us to the next slide. Here is a day at Math on a Stick about 4 or 5 years ago. Just one simple example out of many, 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 but it's a particularly delightful one. This was a 5-year-old girl who was on a Wednesday, a nice, slow, sunny Wednesday morning at the fair, and she had the pattern machine table to herself. You can see that she is at one end of the table, but going down, up in the picture, going to the far end of the table, there are pattern machines lined up, each with a slightly different arrangement on it. Because what she's doing with these buttons, I learned after speaking with her mom, is she had just come from the doggy stunt show, which is just a little ways over on the fairgrounds. She'd fallen in love with the dogs, and she had done some thinking about where do these dogs hang out between shows. They do 4 or 5 shows a day. What are these dogs doing? So she was imagining on these pattern machines different dog pens that she could make for the dogs to run around and play in between their shows. Each one of these, if you look at it carefully, which you don't have the opportunity to do, is at least slightly different from the others. The one that has just made, that's just above the one she's working on, has two pens that are separated by a double wide wall, whereas the one above that has 2 pens that are separated by a single button wide wall. So she was trying to figure out what are all the different ways that I can create this enclosed space for the dogs to run around in. Spent a good 45 minutes engaged in thinking about important math ideas like boundaries and areas, and there's a sophisticated field of mathematics called combinatorics that asks how many ways can we do a thing. And here was a 5-year-old child posing her own and attempting to solve her own very complicated combinatorics problem. So children do amazing stuff when offered the opportunity to play around with sophisticated tools. So one more slide so we can summarize the 3 messages that are important here. Again, children know and can do more math than their caregivers, including their teachers, expect. Learning of mathematics, whether it's shape or number or patterns, is much more like language. We can take a lot of lessons from how children learn language than we suppose in the popular imagination. And finally, given an opportunity and sophisticated tools, children will pursue sophisticated ideas. Not every child, every time they interact, but all children eventually will find some way in which they can express and consider sophisticated mathematical ideas if they're surrounded frequently enough with opportunities to do so. We can go one more slide just so folks can get contact information and find out how to learn more, and then we've got Q&A time. So email, go straight to me, Christopher, very simple, at talkingmathwithkids.com. The blog is there. There's a newsletter that comes out every time I have a chance to, which averages about once every 3 or 4 weeks. You can sign up for it there, and you can unsubscribe anytime. It's short, digestible bits of interesting things around children's math learning, almost always in informal spaces that are interesting to me. And if you are active on Twitter, come play with me over there. Triangle Man. Unfortunately, Triangle Man was already taken by the time I got to Twitter, so I had to put my initials on the end, Triangle Man CS.
Thank you so much, Christopher. And I have lots of thoughts and questions. I'm going to hand it over to Gigi, but as Liam noted, we will also share all of that contact information in the email that goes out after this.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Christopher, for that discussion and introduction to early math today. I really hope that people feel comfortable kind of popping some of their questions either into the chat or into the Q&A, and we'll monitor both. I think I'll maybe start us off with a few questions and see if we could just kind of tee up some discussion. I think the first thing that I just really love to talk about is how do we begin incorporating some of these great ideas into our well child visits in our clinics. So as you know, we've got a limited amount of time in our clinic time it's really about 20 minutes or so for some of these visits in which we are trying to ascertain not just the medical health of the child, but developmentally that kids are on track and be as inspirational as possible to both the guardians and parents and to the kids on directing them. How would you see some of the open-ended play concepts and some of the math concepts being introduced early, and how can pediatricians and nurse practitioners be part of that?
Yeah, so I have a book. I have several books. One of them is titled "Which One Doesn't Belong." If you're familiar with the Sesame Street routine of which one doesn't belong, the iconic one, Grover is being asked which one doesn't belong, and there are 4 circles in a 2x2 grid. 3 of them are large and 1 is small. This book twists that by having chosen sophisticated sets of shapes in ways so that any one of the 4 could be the one that doesn't belong, right? It's not just size that varies, but it might be color, number of sides, other kinds of interesting properties. And so there's a very minimal language input that's required, right? To pose the task, which one of these is different from the others, which one doesn't belong. But a wide range of ways, opportunities for children to express their own ideas. And so a set, it could be themed around doctor's offices, right? We could have a stethoscope and an examining table and 2 or 3 other instruments that are there. We could just have a poster and say, hey, which one of these is different from the others? Like the idea is that we can know a lot about children's mathematical thinking and support their mathematical thinking, even if the objects that they're looking at are not mathematical. That the shifting, like one important mathematical thing, way of thinking is shifting what you're paying attention to depending on your own interests or other kinds of motivations. So as an example of a shape space, which one doesn't belong, you might say, well, if the number of sides matters, then the triangle doesn't belong. But all the others are shaded in and the square down in the lower left isn't shaded in. And so depending on this characteristic, then we have this different outcome. And again, that doesn't matter whether it's a mathematically themed conversation around numbers or shapes, or whether it's something that just already exists in the environment, and we can have those conversations. Simpler version of that is same and different. What's the same about an examining table and a stethoscope? How are they different from each other? That abstracting the characteristics and thinking about sameness and difference is a really useful and important early math skill.
Wow, you've given us a lot to think about there. As over the course of the last few years, we've really leaned into diversity and what a role just books and open-mindedness and our support of that can be helpful in just helping kids and families recognize and have the tools to talk about diversity in characters, in skin color, in ethnicities, in foods that people eat, in all of it. And so even extrapolating that to math is what I'm learning might be another place to lean into.
Yeah, foods are great for that. I'm never excited to hear teachers report or folks report that they're doing which one doesn't belong that involves like actual human beings, because we don't want the message to be that anybody doesn't belong in this math conversation. And so like when I go and have a chance to go into schools and work with kids, we always have an explicit conversation about that. Like it's like if you found your underpants in your shirt drawer, right? Your underpants don't belong there. That's the belonging we're talking about. We're not talking about, whether any of you children belongs here. You all belong here, and we're excited to be talking with each other about our ideas that may in fact be very diverse depending on our own circumstances, experiences, and knowledge.
Wonderful. I have maybe a second question to address, and then we'll start to take some questions from the audience too. I frequently find that by the time kids are in middle school, I will talk to kids about what their favorite subjects are. And a girl might say, well, I don't do math. I'm not good at math. And we all do try to encourage kids, girls, boys, etc., early on to have a love of math early and earlier. Do you have anything that's supportive of some of this early math work that might help us really be able to ascertain if leaning in heavier into shapes and objects could really lead in the end to more girls and a diverse set of kids really being interested in STEM?
Yeah, so I have two things, absolutely, and 100%. Quick anecdote, which is at some point, if people haven't been to my Talking Math with Your Kids blog, it documents conversations that we had in our home, and I try to give parents some pointers about this conversation was about salami. If you're a vegetarian household or you're a kosher house, like it's not about the salami, it's about the snack and about the opportunity to use numbers. But so they document the actual conversations as they occurred in my own home. And at some point, my father noticed that I had written a lot more posts about my daughter than about my son. And he was curious about, where did that come from? And it wasn't a thing that I had noticed. And so, I said, I'll think about that. But also, if the sum total of my work in this space is that girls' mathematical thinking is like massively overrepresented, I think I'm okay with that. Like that doesn't feel like a horrific outcome. Like I'll deal with whatever therapy it causes my son for having his being less documented than my daughter along the way. But in terms of like how we talk about who is welcome, who belongs in mathematics, I'm not worried about having overrepresented my daughter's thinking. But there are two things. One is a bit of research. There is some really interesting research around young children and parental interactions. The particular study I'll tell you about is studied moms and young children, but I'm sure the same biases are built into dads. It just wasn't in this particular study. And so they were studying how much number talk parents use with young children in the course of free play. And so it might be like in a kitchen situation and they're putting grapes on plates or pouring tea for each other. And what they found is that, I don't remember the exact multiplier, but something like 2 or 3 times as often, moms were using number words with young children, with young boys than they were with young girls. And so it wasn't intentional. They weren't like, oh, my daughter can't handle numbers, but they were much more likely to say to a 3 or 4 year old boy, here are 3 grapes on a plate, and much more likely to say, here are some grapes on the plate to their girls. Like these biases are built into our society. And so again, thinking about just math as language, right? 3 grapes. 3 is playing the role of an adjective describing the set of grapes. And how do kids learn those words and the roles of words? They learn through exposure. And so if there's even a kernel of truth in this particular research finding, and it seems like there is, then culture and what they're exposed to is a large part of kids' opportunities to learn math at an early age, and that's going to multiply as they grow. The other is one of the really foundational things for all math learning is spatial thinking. Where is something going to fit is something too big, too small, bigger, smaller, higher, lower, above, behind, that spatial thinking and spatial reasoning, which, you know, we saw the little girl with the shape in her hand doing those shapes puzzles. Like, not all of those shapes are going to fit without having to flip them over. Some of them are asymmetrical, and so you have to flip it over in order to get to fit into place. And that involves having to think about what this shape looks like in space, try something out and get some feedback. And lots of the ways that children in American society are both possibly some innate interest, but certainly massively, that innate interest, if to the extent that it exists, is massively reinforced by cultural messages. Young girls are offered fewer spatial thinking toys in their play, and young boys are offered fewer relationship based, right? So if you think about the iconic message that we offer children, whether it's correct or not, that girls play with dolls and boys play with Legos and blocks and trucks, just as the result of the cultural exposure through play, girls have a lot less opportunity over their early childhood years, on average, to play around with spatial thinking. And so making sure that we're intentional about using number and shape words with girls as we do with boys, and making sure that we're offering them opportunities to engage in spatial thinking, to do puzzles, to fit things into places. I mean, doll houses, like if you've got a kid boy or girl who's really interested in doll houses, there's a tremendous amount of spatial thinking that can go on there. If we're rearranging furnishings, we're deciding whether this chair is big enough to go in there. There's lots of stuff that we can do without steering kids away from, you know, telling girls not to play with dolls is not at all the message. But instead, there are opportunities here that we should take advantage of and create more conversations and more imagining, so that girls have more opportunities.
Wow, you've just blown my mind. There's a lot there to digest as far as the systematic way that we indoctrinate children into thinking about their roles in the world without even recognizing that we're doing that. And I think that's just mind-blowing to really open up the possibilities, even in the doctor's office, to really begin that. I mean, it's so easy to think about how just a few words from a pediatrician or a nurse practitioner can really open up a family's mind to think about some of those things. I see that there's one question in the chat that's really centered around that. And it says, essentially, what can providers do or say to parents or caregivers who don't feel comfortable with math, to really get them inspired to be part of that education team for a child and not defer just to the schools? Do you have any comments about that?
Of course I do. I want to offer up one more piece of research. It's from the University of Chicago, in research that was funded by an organization called Bedtime Math. And they developed an app. An app has just some little story problems that you can read at bedtime with your children. And what they found was that because it was an app and it was on iPads that were handed out to parents, they could track how often the app got opened. And one of the things that they found is that in math anxious households, so this is the kind of household that is being asked about in the chat question, right? I'm not comfortable with math. So when parents weren't comfortable with math, even once every 2 weeks, if that was as often as they were opening this app, they saw growth in kids. And so the researchers
Whoops. Are you noticing, Chris, that he's frozen too?
Yep, I am. We'll give him a minute here.
Okay.
It's a very good question. And there was a question in the Q&A as well.
Oh, perfect. If we get him back, I think the other question that I'm really interested in is about the use of technology. He started to talk about apps, and so, I wanted to hear also a little bit about what he's seeing from a physical puzzle type of world versus a technology video type of interface, and if there's any differences or if it's more available. Just would really love to hear his thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I know. I hope we get him back because there's so many good questions that just bubbling up now. But Gigi, maybe just in the meantime, maybe you, I think maybe folks would be curious just like what your experience with maybe broaching the concept of math in the exam room has been, if that ever comes up organically, or if it feels like maybe it doesn't as often, and just kind of what your experience with that has been so far.
Yeah, I think it's actually been really easy to bring up math in exam rooms. Most of the books that are offered in, you know, the younger age groups have shapes, have colors, have counting as part of what is digestible for kids, and really super easy, even from a distraction standpoint, when you're engaging kids to open up that book and say, you know, show me, point to what's red, at the same time that I'm, you know, using a stethoscope and trying to listen, and get the physical exam part done. So I think it's probably easier than families even recognize, that feel like they don't do math, to start to think about shapes. And this, I think this was a little bit interesting too, for me to hear about what's different, what's the same, and some of the spatial pieces, to think about that as an extension of math also, that families are capable of doing because they're doing it every day.
Absolutely. We have another question here. We'll give Christopher one more minute, but if he's not able to, oh, there he is.
Yay.
I figured, I said, okay, hi, welcome back.
Yes, apologies, little Wi-Fi meltdown here. So just to finish that thought up, researchers, it wasn't that there were this special math problems, but instead that in math anxious households, there is probably almost no conversation about numbers, shapes, and patterns going on at all. And it's like, I think about math as being like death or religion, right? The kinds of topics that when the question, or race, right? When the question comes up, parents who are anxious about that subject will steer the conversation in a different direction. These are like, math gets put into that category of things that parents are afraid to talk about. And if they're afraid to talk about it, they're not going to. So the major message is that anytime, just like when your kid your child utters their first word or takes their first steps, child writes you a poem or draws a picture, if the child offers up an observation about numbers or shapes or patterns, celebrate it and do everything you can to continue the conversation. Even if the conversation only is just one more exchange, you can have, that's going to add up over time, and it's going to have an important and lasting impact in children's opportunities to learn mathematics.
Wonderful. While you were on your Wi-Fi hiatus, we did have we were brainstorming some of the questions we had for you, and one of them was on kind of the physicalness of puzzles versus some of the more technology-based app things, and if there's really any difference that the research has shown, or that in your experience you wanted to chat about.
I'm sorry, I got distracted by the long thing in the chat, so I'm going to hide the chat because I'm not listening. And so ask that question one more time.
Yeah, we were wondering a little bit about if there's any difference or anything that we should be thoughtful about in some of the physicalness of math, whether it's like puzzles and the shapes that little girl Zoe had, versus some of the virtual app-based things that might have math as concepts for younger kids. And if you're thinking about, are there any differences in the outcomes for them?
Yeah, my own thinking is that, especially with young children, is that the virtual opportunities are great when the real world opportunities aren't possible. And we see that there's some interesting, I haven't read recently, but I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, was kind of keeping up to date a little bit about books, you're not on the math side, but on the literacy side. And that lots of books that are embedded in things that go onto iPads end up in parents and kids having conversations about what it is I'm supposed to touch, how I'm supposed to interact with this thing, rather than having meaningful interactions around the story and the literacy experience. So it's a much different experience reading books on iPads with kids than it is reading physical books with kids. And in some important ways, I think a lesser experience. And I think that's true of math as well. There are lots of things that are available for tech that's available for young children to interact with. Not in any way convinced that apart from providing something that otherwise wouldn't be available, there's any great benefit to it. I'd much rather the kinds of feedback that that little girl is getting from jamming that block into place and not having it quite go is just not the kind of feedback that the digital world is good at providing. The digital thing tells you whether you're right or wrong, but you don't get quite as much sense of here's how the world is really working. It's like a simulated world that you're interacting with, which has its benefits. There are definitely, certainly for later kids. I work in electronic curriculum design. We're doing things with middle schoolers and high schoolers with technology that just physical working with paper and pencil you can't do. I'm not sure there's much of that for young children.
Wonderful. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Chris. I was just going to ask a question that was in the Q&A versus the chat. There's lots of chatter in the chat, and we'll make sure we try to get to all of it. We have 3 minutes left. What the question is around how best to interact with a child that isn't able to count as you expect. So in this example, they asked a 3-year-old to give 5 books out of a set of 10, but she was still at that sort of 1, 2. So I think it's really kind of brings up a broader question around what our expectations should be. And I think most parents they're not necessarily aware that this is what my child could do at 1, at 3, at 5 when it comes to math.
Mm-hmm. So I think the major message to take away for parents and other caregivers, including in the medical space, is that there is value in children trying things. There is value in having the conversation, even if the child or the parent are wrong about something. So if I ask a child to count out 5, here's a collection of books, can you give me 5 of them? And they say 1, 2, 3, 5, and they end up handing me 4, but they've counted to 5. No damage done, no intervention necessary. I have a beautiful video of my daughter at 4 years old. I made an interesting video of her older brother, so she wanted me to make a video of her counting. And she counts in just a beautiful wrong way that's completely predictable by all of the things that we know. She does beautifully until she gets to the teens. She skips some, she repeats some. She ends on 29 because getting to the next decade of 30 requires a new word, whereas getting through the 20s, and even though the 20s is cycling through words you already know, and even though the 20s are bigger numbers, they have a simpler structure than the teens. So she does better in the 20s than she does in the teens. All of that is totally normal. I can report to you, she's a 15-year-old who's doing just fine in her Algebra 1 class in 9th grade. Children, barring disability, which is a whole different and important topic. Children will overcome those obstacles, and the way that they'll overcome it is by being wrong a whole bunch of times. They're just and the place that it is okay to be wrong is in play. And so we want parents as much as possible to play with ideas of shapes and numbers and not treat them as though they're these fragile things that we must always be correct about. Laugh about, you say triangle, the kid draws a square. Then the kid wants you to draw a rectangle and you draw some crazy shape. Laugh about that. That's just like you would with using and creating new words.
Wow, what great parting thoughts there, Chris.
Absolutely. Well, we always like to end on time, and we want people to get on with their day. So I apologize that we didn't get to every single question and thought in the chat, but we really, really appreciate the discussion. And we really appreciate you, Christopher, for enlightening us. I think we all have a lot to think about and consider and digest. So thank you. And we'll be sending out an email afterwards, like I said, with all of these resources and including the links to Christopher's website and all of that. So thanks for joining us, everyone. This was recorded as well, so feel free to share it. We'll share out the recording after. Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Christopher.